Welcome to Sky Notes. Some of what we discuss in this episode is deeply emotional and potentially triggering. In this part of our conversation with Sam, we talk about Lilith in astrology. This brought up the topic of sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, and losing a child, which may resonate with some of you very personally. If you're not in the right headspace to join this conversation today, we understand. Please prioritize your well being. If you're not up to it today, you can come back when you're ready. If you're staying, thank you for being here. These conversations aren't easy, but they're important. So take a deep breath if you need to, and let's get started.
Seems like a good segue to talk about Lilith, because we were having a conversation or something was happening online and you asked me my take on Lilith, and I gave a scorpionic answer, something very succinct. That's because I know I have a lot to say about her. So I'll start with that. I think so. For those who are not familiar somehow about Lilith, whether we're talking about Black Moon Lilith or the other two Liliths that exist in astrology, the asteroid, and there's what is it? Weymouth, some other kind of Lilith as well.
It's another body orbiting away from the Earth that comes in and out of focus, and they're not
Right.
sure if it's there or not.
And what's the name of that one?
Dark Moon.
Dark Moon Lilith, right? Because there's
Yeah.
Black Moon Lilith, there's a Dark Moon Lilith,
That's right.
Asteroid Lilith. So I'm a former Baptist minister, and so I also have been steeped in the Bible. And anyone who's been steeped in the Bible, you observe something very interesting from the very beginning. In Genesis 1, God is said to have created man and woman. And then in Genesis 2, chapter 2, is the relaying of the story of creating of Adam, the creation of Adam. And then in desiring for him to have a mate, creating the woman from a rib, right? Now, the careful reader looking at Genesis 1 and 2 would be like, wait. So we had man and woman in 1, but we have Eve emerging in chapter 2. What happened to that woman that was in 1? Now, most Torah readers and Christians would say, like, well, it was Eve. But many have filled in the blanks, including some Jewish rabbis and scholars, including Lilith, who was seen as a goddess and venerated person, including the creator of demons from Babylon, as the woman who's featured in Genesis 1. So Lilith, according to the myth, as being created with Adam, saw herself as his peer, and almost in every way. So, as one story goes, when they were immersed in sex, she decided to go on top. And Adam's like, wait, what you doing? What's going on? Why are you on top? I should be on top. She said, well, oh, hello, I want to be on top, and I'm going to be on top. So Adam beseeches God and be like, yo, yeah, what's going on? Is she supposed to be on top? And then this God is like, well, no, I don't think you should be on top, and I think you should get off and let him get on top. And she's like, oh, bump this. And she sprouted wings and flew out of the Garden of Eden. Okay, now I gave the ghetto version of it, but pretty much that is the story. Her story actually doesn't begin there, to be clear, because I didn't mention that she was venerated in Babylon. And you're like, well, why are you talking about Babylon? Because Jews went into exile in Babylon. So much of what we know that has come into existence in Judaism isn't inherent to Judaism. So some measure of it was appropriated, like the Lilith story, and also the Sabbath, the Shabbat. That also was something that isn't original to them. It's something that was honored, related to the moon, and the moon shifting between 4 phases, which is like divided into the 4 weeks. And so between those phases, one didn't do anything. So you were supposed to rest. And that becomes the premise for the Shabbat that gets incorporated into Judaic culture, along with Lilith. So Lilith was venerated, in many ways as like either some would see her as a goddess in her own right, and some saw her as protector related to that, and some saw her as the birther of demons. That birther of demons seems to have gotten more momentum in the Abrahamic traditions, both in Islam and then in Judaism. I didn't hear about this as much in Christianity. Anyway, so Lilith, as we take it into the other Abrahamic tradition, specifically Islam, marries Samael or Azazel, and who is now what we say as the devil, and has demon children. And these demon children, and including Lilith herself, would create what we know as demons or ghost figures who ride you in your sleep, which are the succubi for men and the incubi for women. And so the succubi is kind of what you feel when you like something's on top of you and you can't breathe, and you feel like you're awake but you can't speak. That's the succubi for a man, or succubus for a man, and then incubi or incubus for a woman. And Lilith is supposed to be the birther of those. Also, what we call SIDS is also attributed to her in terms of the killer of children. And my take on this, now, I don't know if or when I ever will finish this play. I started writing a play called The Gospel of Iblis. And in my vision, I see two things that are striking for Lilith. Lilith as partner to Iblis, the fallen jinn, because it's not an angel in Islamic lore. There are two classes of beings, heavenly beings. They're jinn, who are creatures of smokeless fire, who were here before, on earth, before human beings or in the cosmos, and then angels, who, according to Islamic lore, are completely subservient to Allah. So they wouldn't rebel. The jinn rebelled. So Lilith is married to the jinn, the king of the jinn, Iblis. Still, according to this myth, creating these babies and doing these things. But my take on Lilith was more that she was kind of fed up with all the contestations of divinity, meaning Allah, Iblis, like, why don't you leave us alone and leave humans and earth for humans? You can all disappear. You all can kick rocks. And more so embracing her femininity, her womanhood as a prime symbol, and to be fair, as first woman, first progenitor of earth, or begetter on earth and from the earth. And I see her as, going back to Libra for a second, when I meet a Libra rising, I often evoke Lilith, because I say for Libra risings that they need partners. And when I say partners, not as in like you can't exist without someone being attached to you. I mean more so someone who sees you as a peer, like Lilith did, related to Adam. Not someone who's like, well, you can help me, or, you're my helpmate, but no, they have to have complete equity, which is kind of, clusterfuck, because you got Aries, usually associated with the first house, and Libras, usually associated with the seventh, on the cusp of that. So it's wanting the dynamic of partnership, but sovereignty at the same time. And I think that's Lilith. Wanting that sense of sovereignty and connection and determination and self-determination, but being able to do that with another for a cause or a purpose, which she could have wanted to have, I suspect, with Adam, But Adam didn't want that himself. And that goes into the heart of the myth, because the first thing Adam does, I mean, that Genesis 2 is so amazing to me, or Genesis 3, because there's a couple things that crack me up as an old preacher. One is, when Adam and Eve eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge and discover they're naked. Interestingly enough, God does say in the Bible, like, who told you were naked? Like, and that's funny to me because I'm like, don't you know? Right? Then also just like the general joke, like, I imagine the hosts of heaven being around. He's like, who told them they were naked? Like, how do you know you're naked? So that's funny to me. The other thing is Adam wastes no time like throwing his partner Eve under the bus. The woman which thou gavest me, blah blah. I'm like, wait, that's your go-to? I mean, I often think sometimes, when we go with this mythos of God, that God didn't throw him out, for eating the tree of knowledge per se. It's kind of like Adam just being trifling. Like, that's what you're gonna go into blame, son? You're gonna blame her? Like, and not take any responsibility? None? You're not gonna own it? And you went with it too? You bit into it, Eve? All right, why don't y'all both get out until y'all get some sense? That's how I think about it. And so, but Lilith never had to deal with any of that, because Lilith's like, listen, I know what I want for myself. This man doesn't see me. He can't see me. I'm out. And you can't see me either.
Right.
Speaking to God. So that's my take.
I love that.
I like it.
So I got a few. Tracy, you can duke me out. I'll shut up whenever you say. So I have Sex, Time, and Power by Leonard Shlain. And there's a piece in here about, there's obviously a feminist take, like there is with Kali or Persephone or other goddesses that have a pronounced dark side.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes folks can take it in a trivial direction. But I do personally believe that it's, I'll get the other ones out. Of course, Demetra George, but Chalice and the Blade and Merlin's Stone, Ancient Mirrors on Womanhood. Personally, the story of Lilith really did speak to me from a place of wanting to defend women. And I think in my readings of where she was a goddess or how she was a goddess, she was a handmaiden of Ereshkigal. She could have been a capo for Ereshkigal, and that resonates. And she was also a war goddess, so that resonates, So for me as a woman, it meant the terrible things that I did and that happened to me were some part of a larger context that I could use to develop into a fully mature human.
That's interesting with the way Demetra had that realization of the three faces of Lilith. Yeah. And she had not absorbed that dark moon ideal until she realized, the goddesses generally come with the three faces. And so we can look at the asteroid, the dark moon, the black moon, and that being the evolution of, that story. And so that's what I hear when you're talking about that, Lilith. Lillian, in your story for sure. But I'm trying to decide if I want to share something that I did not know, but I'm afraid I'm going to cry. So I'm not going to share it. You guys go ahead.
You're doing.
You don't want to
You're
cry? A moon in Aries doesn't want to cry.
I ugly cry though, Sam. It's not nice.
Oh, okay.
If I was a pretty gentle crier, I've always dreamed that, but I'm an Aries moon, so it's like, that's what it looks like.
And one of the things I actually wanted to mention, and Tracy, we're just giving you room to stay beautiful and serene, is that I also think that Scorpio rising has that same challenge, right? Thinks of it, and then Taurus on the other side, just, being as carefree of an individual as you can. And here is Scorpio constantly trying to individuate through a relationship, through a person, through their
Yeah,
reflection,
I
you
think
know?
that, but you actually giving me an insight I hadn't seen. So Lilith related to Libra rising, but Eve related to Scorpio. So it's kind of like
Oh,
where I always say with Scorpios is like wanting to see you know, the deeper recesses of things like that
yes,
tree of knowledge, but also not wanting to be seen. There's a,
yes,
because when one is seen a certain way that may not always feel good, right? So
right,
that's another challenge.
right.
That's interesting, the two. And I think I just put this up on, you know, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, where I didn't know that Cain and Abel had twin sisters.
That was the post that I wrote. What
Right.
about Lilith?
What about Lilith? Yeah, that's right. When you asked me, what do you think about Lilith? Yeah, I was like, wait, what? And I think, and some people dismissed it as like, oh, all those myths are ratchet. I'm like, listen, I just grew up with those myths, those stories.
They fill
And
your soul.
there's something they speak to, that those primal stories of how humans have played out from the beginning, between Cain and Abel, but it made sense. But yeah, maybe the story of Libra and Scorpio rising, particularly, is the story between Lilith and Eve. Like, it would be interesting. They did explore this a bit, but not very well. Did you guys ever watch Lucifer, the TV show?
Not all the way through. I did see some of it though.
Yeah, they've explored some of this. With
Yeah.
Eve, I can't remember if they introduced a Lilith. I think they did introduce Lilith, but I don't think it really stuck. Because Lilith in pop culture is often portrayed a certain way that just makes her, lack of a better, more eloquent way to say it, a bitch. My earliest encounter of Lilith, and I didn't watch the show regularly, was Cheers. So Fraser's first wife, or maybe his only wife, if memory serves, was Lilith. And I was just like, oh, okay. I think I know a little bit about that. But this was when I was still a minister, I think, even, or coming out of it, because that was in the 80s.
Well,
Right.
as a huge fan of C.S. Lewis, I was just really shocked that he took Lilith, that he went to the trouble of explaining. And again, I had a realization when I was reading it that he's part of the Theosophists. So my the impact of it didn't reflect that. I just thought he was sexist, and I was exhausted. And in fact, I read Eldridge Cleaver the same year, and I was like, boy, he blames women for shit. Where are we going to go? Where can we go where it's not punching down? You know what I'm saying? Where can we go? So it made me really mad in that way, but I'm curious to see.
And that's an interesting point. Going back to the beginning for a second,
Yeah.
if we could, that's another frustrating thing I deal with. Because you mentioned Merlin Stone, and whether we want to honor her premise or not, that there wasn't, thousands of years ago, that there was more matriarchy and that there was more women in charge. There's something I wrestle with, when that comes up, because this is so much prehistory, we can't even properly debate it.
Yeah.
Right. We can't, we only have rare samplings that make this argument. But here's the thing that I have realized. I say this often about men. I say, like, we're the mutants who rebelled. And when I say we rebelled, I can see that, and maybe at some point in human history, maybe as far back as prehistory, women may have been more in charge. But it's clear we had a rebellion, because I think it's kind of I guess a micro play, I can't think of the actual term, of a macro story of a very micro story that most young boys go through. Let me illustrate and give you what I mean. So my mom was a hitter. right? And I had a smart mouth. You all probably can tell I had a smart mouth. So she wasn't afraid to backhand me or front hand me, hit me in my mouth and whatever. And, as an adult now, not that I am an advocate for corporeal punishment, I can understand it, but I wouldn't condone it. Okay. But I'll never forget when I was 14, I said something to her and she backhanded me and I flew over a settee. And I jumped up and I lost my mind for a minute. When I say I lost my mind, there was a moment in my mind where I looked at her, and this is all within seconds. I looked at her. You know how short I am. My mom was a little taller than I was. I think she was like 5'2" or 5'3". I looked her up and I'm like, she's not that much taller than I am. I'm pretty sure I could outbox her. But all this ran through my mind. I didn't like it. And I just like, I checked my lip for blood. And then I just said to her, you don't get to hit me anymore. Because I was scared of my response. She didn't know that, but I was like, oh, I just think I was just thinking about taking my mother out. And she said, what did you say? I said, I don't think you get to hit me anymore. And the next time you hit me, in fact, I'm telling your mother. And which she had a conversation with her mother about it. And her mother said, yeah, he's too old for you to be hitting it. And why I'm mentioning this is that there's often a moment in a young man's life, not all young men, but when they look, at the domineering, if it's been a domineering mother or a dominant mother, when you're like, I don't think you get to do that anymore, actually. And I wonder if we went through that millennia ago, where men were like, you know what? I don't think you should be in charge. And because I think we act like rebels. Like with this, when we can't allow them to have that, or we'll lose. It just seems that, and we are XY, right? We are the mutants. XX is the foundation. And I often think about that. I mean, we can't go back per se, but I mean, how do we go forward? When you're dealing with this mentality where it's like, well, I'm stronger than you. I'm taller than you. I'm bigger than you statistically.
Yeah.
I'm not speaking for myself, but, statistically, right?
Well, yeah. And to your point, I was in a violent household and I was the youngest. And there came a point, because I had seen what had happened to my older siblings, where they reached that moment, male and female, and said, this is going to stop. So I can share that it happens with women too. I just had that sense of like, if the leadership, if what I get from this is not as good as what I can provide myself, let me go out empty. And I didn't have a faith in that. So I just went out with the Sagittarian shenanigans and, whatever I thought would work and kind of make my way through. But let's go back to the women thing. In my family, the men were evil, the women were holy, or something like that. Then, tragically, I became a whore at 6 or 7 because some man showed interest in me, and dutifully, I tried to, stop being a whore. Just stop it, because that's important. And, I'm not trying to buck what's out there,
And did you say 6 or 7? Not 6 or
Yes.
16 or 17. You said 6
No,
or 7.
No. And I can go back as far as 4, but I was struck by that my interpretation was that I had a failing and that I would have to kind of live with this assignation. And that was my problem, right, to come out of. And obviously this is ancient history, and so it's not a current thing, but the point of that just being, I can tell you from every point of where people fail in their morality or in being kind to people, there are as many women as men, and any possible mixture of, it is the meat suit. It's this suit. And if you're in it, you're capable of the good and the bad. And I don't have answers either for, what
Sure.
do we do with rebellion?
But I think it comes out different, both mythologically, astrologically, and then in real world terms, in terms of how power is asserted, right? Because men like to bring that up, like, well, because I know some men who will say, well, psychological warfare or attack is as powerful as physical. And I had to think that through until I realized, like, considering that men, because this was a big issue even when Diddy and his violence came out. I'm like, they're not the same. You know, I mean, I definitely have experienced psychological or attempts of psychological manipulation from women in my life. But to kind of respond with physical attack is not the same, because it's compounded by both psychic, physiological or physical, and psychical, right? When a man hits a woman, you know, even if it's in quote unquote defense, like, well, she slapped me. Well, she's like 5'4", you're like 6'5". You slapping her is not the same as her slapping me at 4'11". You know, a woman slapping me is not the same as me slapping her, right? It's not. How I've been trained, my musculature, all these other things, and that has ramifications. And so there is sometimes this attempt to equalize, but I think not that we have or should have more power, but I think we assert power a certain way historically that comes with a lot of violence. Tracy, what do you think?
Well, I just had a astrological realization of the flow of this conversation and how Martian. First of all, when Lillian and I looked at our composite chart, we have like 9 planets in Aries in the 9th house in composite. And you and I share where I think we have exact Mars conjunction between us. And just that this whole conversation has gone down, you know, this really powerful path about violence and, you know, that Martian way of getting what you want, which is the opposite of the Venus way that we started out with, that we've sort of gone to the other side. So
I think we can minimize psychological violence that many women, not all, right, perpetuate, and that we don't take seriously. I just wanted to, you know, make it clear that I don't equivocate or make those equivalent. But they're definitely damaging, you know. I've definitely endured my share of it. Yeah, it can be very damaging.
And this
And
darkness,
Lilith,
and
right?
that's the thing, like looking at women, right? We're in the South. The women here are fucking delightful. And I'm not joking. First of all, the women in the South. And they're beautiful, they're delightful, they're polite, they're social, they're adept. And the only requirement is you keep the conversation shallow, you know, and that is where having a 3-dimensional view of women is super helpful, you know.
Yeah, because, you know, they can be all those things until they're not. And then like, well, I just shot him. I put him out of his misery.
That's right. Yeah. There was one time I was mad at my husband, and I, you know, part of my recovery from a violent household was I didn't trust any man who was bigger than me. And I also would get as big as I needed to be so that there wasn't a man who was bigger than me. And so I got mad at my husband. There was something going on, and I was talking to my uncle about it, or his uncle about it rather. And he said, well, I know what you do. You take him to a bar and you beat him from one end of it to the other, and you just keep going. And I know he was saying it because I'm a bigger woman, but in my heart, I was just like, there's literally nowhere where that's an argument resolution. There's literally nothing to it. So even having access to that, which I wanted to talk about in the context of Lilith, the freedom of exile, we haven't really touched on that. And it's something that I think with the mafia and with Lilith is relevant. So
Oh, that's interesting.
right, Lilith
Exile.
was exiled, so she had the whole
Mafia
world at her
also.
feet. Exactly.
Yeah, exile, mafioso, mafia, and Lilith. Well, that brings me to something. I mean, feeling like an exile, being in diaspora, either can be where one's committed to feeling exiled and alone, or to creating a colony, you know. And the great thing about mafia is it creates a sense of family, honor, protection, but it's insular protection on other people's terms, right? And it can do some, like I said, some good. So for instance, the mafia was largely in charge of the numbers racket. The numbers racket was largely tallied related to the horses. And you guys might be familiar with it in the sense that, you know, someone wants to play the numbers, as we used to say it, and they want to play based on a dream, you know, 1, 2, 3, 9. And then they can box it and put it, you know, a certain way and whatever. That was all tied to the mafia until the state, New York State, decides specifically to see this as a way to kind of generate income, and they make it the lottery. Now, you want to hear a funny story. Funny story is my father, when he was involved in organized crime, he didn't do drugs or anything related to drugs. He was off that, but he did bad things. Like he took some people off the planet. And that's a whole different other conversation. But he was more involved in the numbers racket. And one thing that was fascinating is that years later, I ended up working for the Fund for the City of New York. And it was sort of like a brain computer logistical trust that helped take the idea of the numbers racket and make it into a lottery, and basically took the lottery, or I should say the numbers racket, offline. I mean, it still exists, but most people now, and it was, the numbers racket was illegal. But the lottery became legal. So I was like, I worked for the company that helped make that transformation. Basically put my father out of business. Anyway, I think we were going with someone else, but what were you going to say, Tracy?
Oh, I had nothing to contribute to that, but I was going to take us back to Lilith and talk a bit about, I mean, anybody who's listening who's not necessarily an astrologer might not understand, you know, the power of myth and how we see these things play out in our natal and our birth charts. And so looking at, and I did not know that association with SIDS. And I have Black Moon Lilith in my 5th house in Cancer, and my only child died of SIDS. And not only that, she is square my moon, my natal moon in the 1st house. But the thing that is more positive and intriguing is the relationship was really emotionally abusive, and there was nothing left of me by the end. And so when she passed, and then 3 months later, when he walked out, cleaned up my bank accounts, never to be seen again, leaving me a letter to return the video box, I immediately in that moment felt relief because he had taken that away from me, and I was happy for that because there was not enough strength in me to do it myself. But I saw her passing as my ability to now just be independent on my own. And up until that point, I had felt like I had been trained that I had to be in a relationship to be a valid human being. And it was actually through all of that, that I came into that really independent Aries moon side.
Sam, you've gotten us really deep, kind of walking the ocean here.
I think it's our synergy.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you get the three of us together. Like I said, the synergy, the Scorpio rising. I'm your sunrise, right? So,
yeah,
you know,
I've been waiting for you.
yeah, it's kind of like you have to go into the depths.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And that Aries moon had been very much beaten out of me my whole life. So it was a huge turning point. So this was a learning experience for me. Thank you.
No, of course. I mean, and I think Lilith is a fantastic myth and goddess. I mean, like, you know, I'm approaching her for my own, I guess, my own reasons as myth and creative fodder, but that's one of the other things we could go into. And my beef with astrology and astrologers is that we don't acknowledge the livingness, the beingness of these figures.